Hello everyone. I really love English-speaking culture. This became my main motivation to learn this language. And it wasn't only a matter of mass popular cultural product. By immersing myself in my favorite language environment, I have a good chances to unearth real treasures that are inaccessible to mass people. Who knows, for example, the writer James Branch Cabell from Richmond? The guy was unlucky in that his luminal genre was classified by critics as early fantasy, which is formally true, but in fact it brought him into an audience whose preferences he couldn't and didn't want to satisfy. He had an undoubted potential to become at least more famous and popular than Jonathan Swift in the genre of fantastic satire. But the guy didn't see the iceberg that almost half a century later would be created by John Tolkien, and all subsequent years will set the tone in youth culture. What I'm saying is that it's always worth figuring out and looking around at the surroundings in order to see exactly those things that will be more interesting and useful to you personally than what caught your eyes at first glance. And I'm here to help you find exactly such things in modern Russian culture and the ruin the genesis of which developed in the very peculiar and dramatic conditions. The majority in the USSR were convinced that our country and culture were the most advanced on the planet. The art of those years absorbed the great charge of inspiration and reckless positivity caused by isolation and total propaganda. So then, when the Iron Curtain collapsed, disappointment, decadence, and dreams of rebirth followed. A smart move for you would be to first install the YouTube double subtitle application for your web browser. Trust me, this app will make your entry into a new language environment much easier. Last time I talked about several people whose speeches will be interesting and useful to listen to. And today I will tell you about several Russian films that I found interesting to watch more than once. I strongly advise you to stop searching for good Russian movies on rating sites, especially on IMDb. If you don't wanna eat a portion of crazy shit, don't do it, please. The culture war was never ended, and I'm not saying that Russian films for the most part may be of the best interest, but the selection of Russian movies in the IMDb rating is not made for human beings at all. This is my expertise. On the Russian movie platform Kinopoisk, the situation is no better. There are a lot of dolly films in the top of rating that had a good advertising campaign in Russia, but are not interesting in themselves. Also, do not ask for advice in language groups and channels where are a lot of random people, mostly school children. My advice and advice of other reviewers on YouTube will be much more useful to you. Among the films that I enjoyed watching more than once are several animated works from the Soviet era. But this is a separated big topic which I will definitely pay special attention to in one of the next episodes of my podcast. I'm starting my top 3 modern films shot in Russian language with the very Champions Place/Golden Medal. The movie I recently watched, The Master and Margarita by director Mikhail Lakshin, instantly made it into my personal top 1 of Russian cinema. This is a great adaptation of the timeless story with many unique features and a clearly presented narrative. I don't find analogues that are close in meaning either in Russia or in Hollywood. But despite the participation of foreign actors of the first rate, such as August Dil, the IMDb rating not even show it in the rating list of Russian cinema. Instead, IMDb shows you a very iffy sort of abstruse art house, giving you a strange and incorrect impression. I'll quickly go over the plot. The scene of action is Moscow in the 30s of the 20th century. The famous writer, at the height of his career, finds himself at the center of literary scandal. The show based on his play about Pontius Pilate is being removed from the repertoire of the Moscow theater for criticizing the authorities and promoting religious teachings. The work is banned at the meeting of the writers' union. Colleagues demonstratively avoid meeting the writer, and in a matter of days he turns into an outcast. The desperate writer accidentally meets the married Margarita, who becomes his mistress and muse, and she calls this writer master. Inspired by her love and support, the writer takes on a new novel about himself and his surroundings. In this novel, the characters are people from the master's entourage, and Moscow is visited by Satan disguised as a foreign consultant Volant. The Volant and his minions bring chaos to the life of the city and organize a black magic session in the theater. I hope I didn't spoil anything important in my short annotation. In the comments to newly realized masterpiece Master and Margarita, you can notice the far thesis of subworks are bursting. The comrade bodies always have something to report and something to be offended by. Obviously, any work is an individual personal view which doesn't have to coincide with the view of people nostalgic for the USSR. Here it must be said that in this adaptation of Bulgakov's book there are serious shortcomings that can be attributed more to the producers than the director's miscalculation. Yeshua's line was not very clearly spelled out because the war confused the movie maker's plans. And also there are small and not the most significant losses in the ending. The melody didn't fit into the modest budget. Otherwise, The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Lakshin is monumental satanic witchery work. First of all, the plot, characters and scenery is presented exactly as I remember them from the Bulgakov's book read by me in my early youth. Secondly, the movie fulfills with diabolical thoroughness a claim that was only intended by the author of the book. This book in my country was indeed so popular, especially among young women, that it was quite heard as vulgar pulp fiction. But how many of the coolest authors and works have also been labeled superficial because of misogyny in the intellectual circles? For me, all things looks like as if Mikhail Bulgakov was counting on the book being made into a great movie someday. I think he would be grateful to his namesake Lakshin for such a labor, or grateful now if heaven and hell exist. For example, I personally was not so clear and interested in the frequent satirical moments in the book when I read it as a young boy. The film revealed this moment for me in the new way, gave them meaning and drive. The only thing I didn't love was the cuckolding Christianic motivations that permeate both works. But this is forgivable to an author who lived in an even more god-awful epoch than ours, and who wrote with the permission of the leader of the world proletariat made exclusively for him. I wouldn't be surprised if Stalin considered himself as a perfect devil worshipper, and only allowed to write such thing to that author who could do it better way than anyone else, and shut the rest. Such is Soviet Satanism, my comrades. Despite the fact that the film came out quite recently, I've already watched it twice, and most likely I'll rewatch it again somewhere. In my personal list of the Russian films, The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Lakshin is the first place. Don't confuse it with our adaptations of the novel. Time to move on to my next favorite movie, and this is the criminal black comedy Dead Man's Bluff, or Жмурки, directed by Alexei Alabanov. First, I need to convey to you what the word Жмурки means, and what context the author put into the film with this name. Жмурки is a children's game where one participant is blindfolded and when he catches the others. If I'm not mistaken, the Western analog is called Blind Man Buff or Blind Man's Bluff. Zashmurica means to close eyes tightly and forcefully. The same word is used in Russian criminal slang and meaning to die. That's why one of the main characters of the film, scumbag Sergei, calls the game of Russian roulette like Жмурки. There is a play on words and double meaning that gets lost when the title is translated into English version like Dead Man's Bluff. Although the title Dead Man's Bluff, with the reference to the children's game, generally correctly conveys the mood of the movie. And atmosphere is always the main thing in everything, I think. The plot of this black comedy is stereotypical of any gangster film. I won't go into the details. Several groups of bandits find themselves in difficult and dangerous situations involving 2 suitcases filled with money and heroin. And in these few words all the scenario is, but the value of the film is not in the plot but in the presentation, which director Balabanov partially borrowed from Tarantino and Guy Ritchie. However, Alexei Balabanov demonstrated a unique atmosphere and style in this movie. In a nutshell, this is a dark drive, extreme violence, naturalistic torture and cruelty. The icing on the cake is absolutely politically incorrect humor and, in general, some expansion of the framework that is not allowed to Western movie creators today. I hate seeing human suffering on screen, but in this film all this is presented with hellish irony without forcing heavy thoughts and feelings. Looks very entertaining. Director Alexei Balabanov is true master of his craft. Several very different and cult films came out of his hands, and the most cult films in Russia, Bravo and Bravo 2, are also his work. Giving credit to duology Bravo and Bravo 2, I would not rewatch these 2 films. They're quite exciting, but for my personal taste, both films are, as we say, one-time watches. But Dead Man's Bluff has a strange appeal for me. The film never loses its face for a minute, and in general there are no drawdowns in it. But I don't have much else to say about this movie. This is a spectacle that is difficult to describe in words and which must be seen. So let's move on to the next one. Rounding out my top 3 Russian films that I have watched several times is a movie based on the book by my favorite Russian writer, Viktor Pelevin. I'll tell you in the detail about Pelevin when it's my turn to write my report on modern Russian literature. Now, I'll only say that he is kind of author whose books no one could adaptate in a comprehensive and correct manner. And the director of the film Generation P didn't quite succeed either. But I'm not one of those geeks who never misses the opportunity to tell you that a book is better. I'm quite capable of considering cinema as a separate work. And as a separate work, I like the film. There is a development and dynamics in it. There are quite beautiful plans and interesting dialogues, taken in slightly abbreviated form from the Pelevin's book. The plot takes place in the turn of the 18th and 19th in Moscow. The USSR is collapsing and the stormy events and bustle happening around. It's like a mini-apocalypse. The grandchildren of people who robbed the population of Russian Empire in 1917 came up with the new slogans to turn everything stolen into their legitimate private property, which could be inherited and exported abroad. The movie tells us how a whole new world of Western values with completely unknown rules of the game falls on the head of an unprepared Soviet nerd. This new world is accompanied by a rise of crime, drug addiction, cutthroat competition, and boundless cynicism. But this new world also provides incredible opportunities for both material and spiritual growth. The main character, whose name is Vavilian, strives to climb both stairs. Having got a job of copywriter in an advertising organization, he learns about the structure of mysterious world of money. And after some time, he realizes that the rabbit hole is as deep he couldn't have imagined before. The film is filled with many ironic allusions to the post-Soviet history of Russia. Therefore, you need to be in the context a little to understand some of the jokes. With all his desire, director Ginsburg couldn't convey the work of Viktor Olegovich Pelevin, which is extremely rich in philosophical meanings and subtexts. But the film works well as an introductory promotional teaser for the book, in which all the themes touched upon in the film were explored in much more depth. After all, a book, as you know, is always better than a film adaptation. I'm not a big fan of rewatching films I've seen once, especially Russians. There are always some promising new products and sometimes there is a whole queue of them. A film must really hook me in some way to make me want to watch it again. These 3 that I talked about today really stuck with me. There are Our Russian films that left me with positive impressions, but which I watched once and didn't rewatch later. Let me try to talk about each of them very briefly in one paragraph. Poor Pavel is movie adaptation of Merezhkovsky's historical novel about the emperor who had mental disabilities. He inherited a huge country with a bunch of problems and soluble contradictions. He tries to solve problems with sweeping and infantile methods, but the people around him are gradually losing their loyalty. They plot to assassinate the incompetent Tsar. Go next. King Zaza is an art house with elements of satire in wasteland settings similar to the setting of Mad Max. Two Soviet citizens find themselves on an unfamiliar planet, where they get acquainted with the local strange inhabitants, customs, and rituals. Next. The Man from the Boulevard des Capuchins is a romantic comedy. The main character of the film tries to correct the harsh morals in the town in the Wild West with the help of an improvised cinema. But this task turned out to be very difficult. Next. I Am is a mystical drama directed by Igor Voloshin about a party of young Soviet drug addicts and punks, one of whom decides to avoid the army with the help of the psychiatrical hospital. This philosophical and religious film is built in no small part on the dark contrast to the Ken Kesey novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest. Next. Mary Poppins Goodbye, a movie for children in very light and musical tones. The action takes place in England in the mid of 20th century. The nanny hired to look after the children turns out to be a sorceress. Next. D'Artagnan and Three Musketeers is a musical series about the adventures of the newly minted musketeer in France during the times of Louis XIII and the Cardinal Richelieu. The hero will have to unravel the tangle of intrigue around the royal family. Inspiring songs from this series became truly folk songs in the USSR. Next. The body will be committed to the ground and the senior warrant officer will sing. That was the title of the movie, guys, not a joke. It's hard for me to explain why this movie hooked me. Perhaps the feeling of freedom and flight characteristic of the era when it was filmed. The action takes place in the St. Petersburg in the 90s. The two main characters are angels on a mission. But to use a quote from the movie, they are not the angels that various assholes draw in their paintings, but the real angels. The film has a lot of gloomy style like comic books of Sin City or Batman. Superheroes are also vulnerable here, and the surroundings is vicious and hopeless. In the end of my list, I can also remember another films. The very same Munchausen, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, the Broward duology, which I already talked about today, Midshipmen Onwards, and others. Everyone can find something they like in the huge number of films shot here. Below in the description I will leave a link to a site with a selection of films which I consider more or less adequate. At least it will be more useful to you in your search for interesting Russian cinema than IMDb. And with that, let me take my leave, guys. Link to my social media networks will be in description below. I'll be glad to see you there. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And ring the bell, and thumbs up.